what we're going to be making, just out of an old t-shirt market bag. So I hope you've got your old t-shirts with you, and then we can get started on that. So all you're going to need today is an old t-shirt, a ruler, a pen, and some scissors. And this piece requires like no sewing, so it's really easy. I've just got an old t-shirt from when I've been decorating. It's covered in paint. The charity shop wouldn't want it. I don't need it anymore. If you've got a bigger t-shirt, it's helpful, but if not, those sort of market bag slits will help us work into it. So you're going to want to fold it in half, and this is just where we're about to start cutting the sleeves off to give us our handles. And so you're going to want to cut the sleeves off, but I find like we can follow this line, and if you're trying to be quick, you can cut through both layers, but I find it easier to just cut through that first layer along that sleeve edge, and you want to kind of save as much of that width of that shoulder for your handle as possible. So cut along the edge, and I cut one sleeve, and then I use that to trace off the other, because it's just a little bit easier than trying to cut through 4 layers at once. And so you can put those to the side, and they're really useful just to keep, because, you know, those sleeves are perfect. Use them as washcloths, use them in your kitchen, you know, never waste anything. So now we're going to cut around the neck to do like the second bit of the handle. You don't want to cut too low, because you don't want to lose too much of your body of your bag. And so for this one, I find it easier to cut through everything, trace it round, and snip that bit off. And so basically this top bit, it will look like a big kind of summer vest, then becomes the top of your bag. And then if you, those kind of shoulder straps, you want to try and keep as wide as possible. If your t-shirt is not very well sewn together at the top, you might want to slice the shoulders and tie them in a knot, but that's why we keep as much as possible. So the next bit we're going to get rid of is we're just going to cut off that bottom sewn hem, because when we give it the fringe, we want to kind of get a nice dangly fringe, and that bottom hem bit stops that bit on our t-shirt. So just cut along your stitch line, and again, I find it a lot easier if you cut through one side, trace it all the way around, and cut through the other side. And then you're just going to want to remove this piece from your t-shirt. And again, like, it's quite a well sewn strip, so this is quite good, you know. You can use it to tie, you can use it in your garden, like just try and keep, you know, as much of it as possible. So now we're going to cut the bottom of our t-shirt into strips, and this is then what will be our fringe and what we'll be able to tie. So if you want to grab your ruler, and so depending on how big your t-shirt is, so mine was an extra large, so I'm measuring up 14 centimeters, and this is just a rough guide. If you've got quite a small t-shirt, you might want to do 10 centimeters, but you just want to make sure that it's long enough so we can cut our strips and they're long enough to tie. And so I just sort of trace along, and when we cut and tie this, you're not going to see your line. You just want it enough so you can see it, so we know that we don't cut past that, because we obviously want to keep the body of our t-shirt for our bag. So now the strips, I think a good width is 2 centimeters. So if you cut up first the side to your line, And then just use your ruler to just, you know, this doesn't have to be super strict. So I've just placed it along to cut a few notches to get an understanding of what is 2 centimeters. And then you're just going to want to cut all the way up to that line. So hopefully you've got some sharpish scissors. And then you can just use that as a rough guide and go all the way across. If you're sort of someone who's super neat, you can draw all these lines. I got into crochet because I'm quite a slapdash maker, so you'll notice through this there's not really a wrong and a right. Once we kind of cut all these, we want them to be 2 centimeters ish, and it might feel like they're quite thick, but in a later stage, because it's jersey, you then sort of pull on the strip and it kind of makes it into a cord. So t-shirts are what as well. This is obviously using it to make a bag, but if you're into kind of like, if you like macrame or crochet or knitting, t-shirt like material is really great sort of substitute for yarn, and you can cut into your t-shirts and just pull it and it forms more of a tube, and it's really good for other sort of craft projects. So you just want to work your way down the whole line. And because we're cutting through both sections at once, the front and the back, we know, like, we don't need to calculate how many strips we've got because we know we're cutting them into pairs for when we tie them at a later stage. So just keep working your way down. And it's really helpful to do this sort of on a table or a smooth surface, because then you know that your fabric is like flat on both sides. And we're nearly at the end of that bit. And so if you're liking this sort of fringe, you can just do this. I mean, we're making our t-shirt into a bag, but it's really a great way to sort of jazz up an old t-shirt. You know, you can cut these strips and pull them and give anything a little bit of fringe, because I think I'm a sucker for fringe. So I love a little bit of fringe on anything. And then at the end, you just want to cut up the side. My t-shirt, you'll notice, doesn't have seams up the side because it's a circular bit of fabric. If you've got a seam, you just want to cut that out. So this stage you don't have to do. And if you've got a t-shirt with a design on you want to keep, you can kind of skip this bit. But you can see, like, this is how big my bag section is. And if I want to increase it, this is how we get the sort of market bag look. And by doing a sort of lattice cut on your bag, like on your t-shirt, it will stretch it, and it means that we can increase the volume. So again, really roughly, we want to take our ruler, and at the edge, you just, where you've cut, you want to probably give yourself like 5 centimeters so you're not too close to the bottom of your bag. And I'm just going to use my pen to mark that. And then I'm going to do like 3 centimeters, 1, 2, 3, and then mark again. And then I'm going to do another 3 centimeters and do a little mark again, and another 3 centimeters and a little mark again. And I'm going to do one more, but again, you don't want to cut too close to that bottom of that handle, because t-shirt is really resilient, but it will only stretch so far. So now with your scissors, you just want to do a little cut about 1.5 to 2 centimeters in. And again, if you're really precise, you can draw this out, but I've just done it by eye. You then want to fold it over. So you've got, you know, you probably folded it over 2 centimeters. And we're going to now do our little cut again, but right in between our previous cut. And we're kind of going to follow this to make a brick-like pattern. And again, I'm not going to go too close to the top of the handle or too close to the bottom. And then you fold in a little bit again. And then you're going to want to repeat this across the whole of your bag. This is where it's really important basically to try and do it on a flat surface, that when you're working you don't go too sort of wonky with your cuts. And so just keep an eye that you're not going too close to your handles. And so we're going to just repeat that, keep going across. So we fold it over and then we just do our cuts. And because we're cutting on the fold and we're cutting between 1.5 to 2 centimeters, when you lie it flat, the slits in your work should be around 4 centimeters. If you go much bigger, when you pull it, your bag will become really mesh-like and probably a little bit too holy. So just keep an eye. You really just want to do that cut so it's not too deep. And then you just keep folding. And just, I think when you're making your bag, this is probably like the trickiest bit. Just be aware that you don't go too close to your other cuts. But if worse comes to worse and like 2 of your cuts like join, don't worry. You can use safety pin, you can sew it. It's really forgiving. And this will just basically increase and double the size of your bag. And you want to basically keep doing that all the way across. You can also, if your t-shirt is quite narrow, or you're using like a kid's t-shirt or a small t-shirt, instead of doing these slits this way along the t-shirt, you can also do them in the other direction. So these are going horizontal across our t-shirt, but you could fold it the same way and cut them vertically to give a bigger width to your t-shirt, rather like to your bag with your t-shirt, rather than more depth. And I think when you get about halfway like this, it's just good to check that when you're folding it, that you're trying to keep it as straight as possible, so you don't start cutting into like the bit that you've cut for your strap. And just make sure, you can see at the top that there's quite a big depth from the middle before my first cut. And that this just means that your handles are gonna stay secure, and that we can put, your market bag will be good for carrying quite a lot of stuff. And you just want to keep following that down. So if you were going to use a t-shirt for like yarn or a piece of fabric, quite like how we're cutting the strips through the middle, you could trace a line up, and right before you get to the top, you come down the other way and you kind of do a bit of a zigzag. And kind of like where the join is, where we're doing how far apart our cuts are now, you could do that in a straight bit of fabric, and it would give you a yarn, which is really fun to use for anything sort of homeware or accessories. It's a really good resource for using up old t-shirts or scraps of yarn. So we're coming towards the end of our piece, and can you see I've sort of skew-whiffed a little bit, and so instead of doing my last cut at the top, I've reduced my slits because I didn't want to cut too close to my handle, and I've put one more at the bottom to sort of level it out. And so just at the end, just make sure you're folding it as flat as you can, because holding it at the sides is quite important. So there's this row, and we've got one last row on our seam to cut. And the reason we do the cuts now, because it's a lot easier to cut our t-shirt and make this mesh before we tie the bottom. If you tie the bottom first, it distorts, which is harder to cut your line straight. So now you can see that it's kind of like the lattice on a pie. When we stretch, it like increases the volume of our t-shirt. And so if you want to make a nice top of a pie, you do the same in pastry. And so now we get on to the bit where we're sort of turning our fringe a bit more into cord. So what you're going to want to do is hold the top of the cord firm, and then you're just going to pull your thread, because in this bit we're going to be tying knots. So to make it easier to tie our knot, what we're going to do is you're going to hold on to your t-shirt and we're just going to pull. And so you want to work one side at a time, or each thread at a time, because you'll get the maximum stretch. And so you want to work your way across, just holding, and so hold the end and just give it basically a tug, and you'll see that your jersey strip will kind of curl in on itself and form more of a cord. And so we're going to work our way down the whole t-shirt doing that, and just make sure that you're holding on to your t-shirt or holding it onto the table so it's firm enough so you get the most stretch out of that piece. And so if you were going to be making t-shirt into yarn or cutting up, so jersey's great because it does this, it turns itself into a cord, and you can see it gets a much kind of tighter cord. That's why we chopped the hem off at the beginning. So I've now worked my way across the whole edge, and we get into the macrame section, flatten it all out. And all we're going to be doing is a really basic hitch knot, which is a really good entry level macrame knot. So you're going to take one strand from the front side and one strand from the back and fold it over itself so you get this sort of like point, and it's 2 layers of knot. So I'll talk it through again. You take the top strand and the bottom strand, fold the top strand in the direction of left and pull up through, fold it left, up through the middle and give it a tug and work your way across. So we're taking the top, and just when you're doing this, spread it out so you make sure you're taking the top strand and the one from the bottom. So the top strand folds over the top of the bottom, pulls through, folds over, pulls through. And we're working our way across the whole of the bottom. So I'll talk that knot through again. So you're making sure you're getting the 2 that are in pairs. You take the top strand, you kind of fold it over the bottom strand a bit, like it will look like a number 4 or like an arrow that points to the left, and up through the middle and pull, and up through the middle and pull. And you repeat that twice, and it's a double hitch knot. And that will be strong enough to hold the bottom of your bag. And it's a really great entry level sort of macrame knot, and it's really easy. So this is a really fun, easy make that the whole sort of family can do. And if you're wanting, like I was saying, like if you want to make it slightly simpler, if you want to get younger sort of kids involved, you don't need to do the lattice work in the middle of the t-shirt. And so now I'm just racing through the bottom. And this is just, make sure it gets a little bit fiddly because you've obviously got 2 layers, but just make sure you're taking one from the top and one from the bottom, and you're working your way through. And just that you're doing it in that double hitch, that you're repeating the knot twice to just make sure that it's tied tight enough at the bottom. And you're going to carry that on all the way to the edge. And I love that this is just a real easy, you know, 20-minute, half an hour make, and you transformed that old dirty paint t-shirt that was going to sit in the bottom of a cupboard if you finished all your decorating and you're not going to, you know, or that t-shirt that's got a stain on that the charity shop won't want. But it gives it such, you mean, we get 1,000,001 tote bags from everywhere, but you just don't need that tote bag and you can use your own old t-shirt. And there you have it, from one t-shirt. That's our fringe at the bottom that will hold nice and firm. And there, from one t-shirt, you're all done.